in the southeast of England, just outside London. So a very close family member of mine was diagnosed with LCH several years ago. This was while I was still studying, so it was kind of in between uni and drama school. And to be honest, what I mostly remember about it was how long it was to figure out what was going on. It seemed to start just through really little things, such as energy levels completely dipping, issues with like skin. I understand to a certain extent why it took so long, because lots of doctors were like, oh, maybe it's this little thing. You know, they would always look at what is most likely and most everyday, I suppose, first. But as time went on and it didn't get better, I think everybody in the family became more and more worried about just what was going on. Why, whatever was happening, whatever the solutions we had been given, they hadn't completely resolved the problem. It felt like it was a never ending process. And it ended up that they were looked at by the very lovely people in the UCL hospital in London. And there was a certain period when I was working in London at the time, and I'd have like a very short lunch break, and I would kind of get the tube from work and then very, very quickly get there to the hospital to see how they were doing, and then quickly get the tube and quickly go back. It would be like 10 minutes, but it would be like worth the tube journey to be able to check in. And I think that was the moment where we realized that whatever was going on, it was something a lot more serious. And eventually they were diagnosed with LCH, which threw everybody, because nobody knew what it was. None of us knew what it was. And eventually that led to chemo. And after, again, that felt like that was a never-ending process. Honestly, when I look back on it now, it all feels like one big blur. But luckily, chemo has ended, and they are in a very stable place with the LCH now. But it was a very long, confusing process, yes. I think for me, there were probably two moments. One was either when they'd always been incredibly active, more so than me, which sounds ridiculous because obviously I'm younger. But they as long as they've been in my life, they've been so active. And it really felt over that kind of short 1 to 2 year period where we were still figuring out what was going on, their activity levels completely tanked. And that's really what made everybody worry, because it's one thing when, you know, you start to lose appetite, or your skin feels off, or your energy feels off, but to be off and then for it to completely tank, it's two completely different realities, you know. So it's either that, or, as I mentioned to you earlier, when I was kind of hopping on the tube every lunchtime just to go and check in at the hospital, because they were there, I want to say, for several days to a week minimum, I would say. And that was when it kind of, I suppose without me realising it, I realised it was something a lot more serious, because, you know, I think we've all had family members that have had to pop into the hospital for something smaller, but usually, if they're lucky, it's something that's short, they get treated, they can go. Whereas, you know, that longer period really made me think, okay, whatever it is, they're struggling to figure it out, and they can't go home either because they're in the hospital. It's checking about the LCH, and of course they're still very wary about how immunocompromised they can be, and it's just kind of both maintaining that good place with the LCH, and then in the long term just building health back up, right? Because you really take a hit from it. So that's been, you know, a very long term journey. Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we didn't even really, I don't know whether notice or think about is the right word, but something that's incredibly prevalent now that has occurred specifically after the LCH. So we don't know to what extent it is completely the LCH, and I think, they've discussed it with doctors and so on, but they had a loss, a dip in their ability to hear. So that's obviously something that's going to stay with them forever now. They can still hear, but, the levels aren't the same, and they require aids and help with that. And then the other biggest one I would say is actually just the everyday well-being. So things like the energy levels, how much they can eat, little things like that. Even some of the skin things, stuff like that, where before LCH those things were never an issue, and post LCH that's what has been more long term, and it's something that we're always trying to look into. Can we build that back up? Can we change it? Can we improve it? Things like that. Even today, when I talk to people about it, I always try to figure out how best to convey it to people, because sometimes the easiest way to explain it to people or to help people feel like they can relate to it better is to go with, well, it's a syndrome, or it is a condition where often it gets treated by chemotherapy. So for a lot of people, they've heard of chemotherapy, they might know somebody that has had cancer, or they're just really aware of cancers and how they're treated. So to come at it to explain that chemo is often utilized to help treat forms of histio can be helpful for them to understand it a little bit. When I've tried to get into it further, I'll be perfectly honest, often I pull up Google, like the Histiocytosis Association page, and read it out so that they can hear it from a proper professional that's written it down, just because I think that's probably been part of why histio has gone under the radar, not just because it's rare, but because if you throw out something more everyday like flu or like cancer, I think people have a very fixed, simplified, and rightfully so, to help with that view of what that is. Whereas with histio, so many different permutations and forms of histio can manifest very differently. So I think it can be hard for people to digest. But what has always made me happy and what's given me hope, I suppose, is even just telling people about it makes them curious to want to look it up, to understand it. So the fact that even myself, where I've read a lot around it by virtue of having a close family member and seeing them deal with it every single day, even the fact that I struggle to completely pin it down to explain to people makes them go, okay, wait a second, I want to look into it. And usually when I try to break it down as well a little bit for people, I explain how many children get diagnosed with it, the ages at which commonly these kids have to deal with it. So my family member that dealt with it, they were much older, which is quite rare. And they were told at the time, it's quite rare for you to have this. But I tend to explain that often it is with children, because again, that helps them, that often makes them go, wait a second, there is, histiocytosis and it affects kids, but I don't know much about it. So that makes them want to look it up. So I know that's a terribly long-winded answer, but usually I want to just tell people about the fact that it exists in the first place, and to help direct them to places like the Histiocytosis Association or Histio UK that do a lot to raise awareness. And as soon as they realise how serious it is because of the types of treatments that are required and how long term often histio can be, then that makes them want to go and look. So I always say, just go, if what I'm saying doesn't seem clear, go and look it up. Just take a Google and go and read a bit more about it. in a strange way, I think the fact that we took so long to get a diagnosis meant that in some ways we adapted without realizing it, because every time a new little thing came up, we would deal with that. And you want to help them deal with whatever they're dealing with, whether that's, a big loss of energy, a big loss of appetite, struggling with what they're gonna use on their body because they don't understand what's happening, and because all the little symptoms popped up in little increments, hence why it feels like it's been this really long period because it wasn't like an instant, oh, I had a cough one day and then now I've suddenly got to deal with it. I know there was a time before this, but at the same time it wasn't this kind of clear juncture where I could say before and after. So in a strange way, we've all adapted naturally to it because it was just something, somebody takes a little hit, you adapt to that. They take another little hit, you adapt to that. But I think in the long term, the thing that I lament the most, and I think, I would say everybody laments the most, is just the loss of energy from the fact that they were so out and about, so active and so able to go everywhere and all of that. And it's not that they can't do these things, it's just, that's the biggest change, I think. Like, I really see that division in my head where before, say if we were on holiday, they would be able to go walk out the entire day. Like I'm thinking of like a city break or something like that. If it was something like that, some of us would be like, no, I just want to stay in the hotel. I really don't think I have any energy. They'd be like, yeah, we can walk everywhere, we can go everywhere. Whereas these days, they would probably only have 50% of that energy. If they have more than that, I'm always like, oh my gosh, this is so amazing. They're able to do this. And I find that, I don't know if sad is the right adjective to use, but I do find that sad a little bit, because health is wealth, and energy gives you the ability to do things, and the more energy you have, the more you can do. And yeah, it's just different. Oh my goodness. Honestly, seeing the work that the History of Cytosis Association does, the History UK do, seeing all the amazing people around the world that deal with histio. I know this all sounds terribly cliche, but that deal with histio and find ways to raise awareness about it, that find ways to fight it, that find ways to redefine what normal and healthy and good means to them. I find it so inspiring and so beautiful. And in September, when it was Histiocytosis Awareness Month, what really struck me throughout the entire month was seeing so many different stories, the variety of stories from all of those different people, where you felt the loss that they felt because of what histio took from them, but also how they found a way to fight that and a way to get strength to move forward. And you know what, even seeing stories about parents and family members that have found ways to give their children, or whichever family member is dealing with histio, the way that they've found strength within themselves to then give them more strength. I just think that's so amazing. Like, as somebody who works in entertainment, and I feel like I'm talking about stories with people all the time, whether those are like real stories in non-scripted or fictional stories in scripted, sometimes seeing those little snippets, like what the Histio Association does with these little segments, that is, you can't write that. Like, you can, but it's still never like seeing the the real stories of how people find a way to keep going. Talking to other members of your team and them telling me about parents whose children have had it, and even when the child has recovered from it, the parents still want to make sure and support the association because they want to give back and find support for the next family. Or being told again, I've been told by your team about kids that have had it, that have grown up to become doctors, that now want to deal with it because they want to give back and help the next generation that are going to have to deal with that and struggle with that. That's incredible to me. It really is. There are so many wonderful people online around the world. I can't imagine how it would have been before the internet. I mean, in terms of there are so many communities like the History Association. There are so many online groups. There are so many places where when you're first diagnosed, if you go there, people straight away want to support you. They want to talk to you, give you resources, give you inspiration. My family member in particular that had it, they're quite shy. They're not the first person to want to talk to people, but they went online and saw stories about people that dealt with it, and that helped them feel, okay, these people that have had that lived experience have gone and they've been treated and they've recovered, and these are the support networks they've had. And I know that gave them a lot of comfort, and them knowing I'm doing this right now is giving them comfort, is making them happy, so we're so lucky that we live in this internet age. And I'd be like the first person to be like, oh, the internet can be awful, but we're so lucky in this internet age that there are people like at a touch of a button that instantly want to help you, that want to support you, that want to make sure that you're okay and that you feel okay. Pre this, I honestly, I don't know how it must have been so isolating to have it and to feel misunderstood. And I think that was a struggle that my family member felt in particular at first before they delved into things, which was, I have no idea what this is. I don't know what this means for me. I don't know what to do. I don't know how it's going to turn out. We fear so much, like as humans, we fear the unknown so much. And places like the History Association declutters and demystifies all of those things to help take that fear away. It really, when they got diagnosed, it really, because it had taken so long for them to get a diagnosis and because it had seemed so difficult, and then to be made fully aware of how rare what they were dealing with was, it's just something that's always stayed with me, in that even just to explain, like I said to you earlier, even just to explain what they were going through to other people. I'm quite a private person, so I'm not one to talk a lot about it, but even when I talk to close friends and such about it, the fact that even that was difficult, I was like, there's an issue here. The fact that all of this process is so drawn out, it's painful, it's stressful, as it would be with any kind of difficult illness, that for so many people to be dealing with histio, and yet for it to not be known, and yet for it to be hard to even explain, that has never felt right with me. And seeing the work that you do that has such a big impact, it has such a big impact because it just makes people that have to suffer with this feel less alone. It really does. So if sharing this story helps to, like, if it adds to that tapestry of all the different stories that you've collected over the years to help other people feel less alone, then that's worth it, right? So it's like if you've built up like this patchwork quilt of all of these stories, and that quilt is like a blanket that gives people comfort when they're dealing with this. If that one square that is this story helps to make that blanket a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger, then I'm just grateful and happy to be able to do that. So generally it comes from, I work in the kind of entertainment media space. It's all terribly nebulous, and often it's through projects that I do. So it can be as simple as, for example, last Fashion Week I did both London Fashion Week and Paris Fashion Week, and myself and my stylist, we crafted all the looks that I would wear across both fashion weeks. All of them had a bit of blue in. So September is Histiocytosis Awareness Month, so that was me kind of giving a little nod and hopefully doing a little bit of my part to add to that, and how it can help beyond just me, I suppose, posting a nice picture on Instagram and talking about that further to followers and other people, is also, you know, at places like Fashion Week, we're all talking to each other. We all want to talk about each other's outfits, and there are so many, as superficial as it can be, there are always many wonderful, inspiring stories about how fashion and creativity can help raise up people, raise up voices, raise up social groups and social causes. And being able to sit there and then tell people, oh, I'm wearing blue because of Histiocytosis Awareness Month. And then I always get the, what's histiocytosis? And being able to impart that, like every single person, I get to impart that to. I'm like, oh, that's another person. So it's little things like that that hopefully just add a bit more noise, raise a bit more noise on top of all the amazing work that all the many other hundreds of thousands of people are doing to kind of lift up histio and make people aware of it. There was one time in one of the London shows, and this was so cool to me. I was sitting next to someone on the front row, and they were wearing this most fabulous outfit, and I have to compliment you on it. And they were, as luck would have it, they were a model / like medical professional. And so when I mentioned histiocytosis, they didn't know precisely what it was, but obviously because of the words, they were kind of able to figure it out. They were like, oh, is this what it was? And I was like, oh my God, yes, that's exactly what it is. You're like the first person that I haven't had to be like, well, so it's kind of like, they were like, wait, no, I get it. So that was really, really cool. That was the last place I would have expected anybody to kind of guess what it was, but that was really awesome. I wouldn't say I have necessarily a histio hero. I will say that, you know, I watched like all of the videos, or all the ones that came off my timeline that were put out during Histio Awareness Month from all of the different people around the world that had sent in stories. That in itself, it really floored me. I'm a very emotional person in general, but that really, there's some that I would replay, honestly, because of how powerful their story is. And what's really cool now, I think, is that we're seeing more people in the public eye that are going through rare diseases, not necessarily histio specifically, but that are more open about either talking about it or incorporating it into their art. So even in the series finale of my show, we recorded it a couple of days ago, and I ended up talking about it because there was an album released by a pop artist, Halsey, recently, where she talks about going through a very serious chronic illness. I think it was both lupus and then another type of rare disease, and she had them both. And then the entire work talks about, you know, having to deal with her worries about mortality and leaving behind her child and all of that, which I don't think is, I think beforehand people often want to package some of these stories up in specific ways to make it palatable or whatever, whereas I think we're getting to a point more now where people that do have a platform genuinely want to say what it is they go through truthfully. They want to incorporate that. They want people to understand what it is that they're suffering with, like warts and all. They're not prettifying it for the sake of making it more palatable for consumption. And I really like seeing that, because then that also helps when I see stories like the association puts out, because those are truthful, honest stories. And I think sometimes when people don't want to deal with it, they say, oh, it's too much, it's too heavy, it's too much. So actually having people in the public eye that have the power to say things like that, genuinely say things like that, helps to normalize when people who are genuinely suffering from, not that they aren't, but who are not in the public eye, I mean to say, that are suffering as well, when they speak out about it, it helps to normalize the fact that they want to put out their messages and that they want to speak their truth. And both of those things just I find very inspirational and beautiful. We're seeing like more and more in discourse today, people talking about, well, social media, is that making us all focus on just making sure our world looks beautiful? Are we really being honest about what we're presenting? There's this whole idea around authenticity, right? Are people being authentic? Are people being truthful when they present themselves on social media or online or anything like that? And we can't have a complete discussion about whether someone is or is not being authentic when they feel that if they are suffering from a rare disease or chronic illness or anything like that, that they have to hide that. They should be, if that is their truth, to use a very cliched phrase, but if that is their truth and if that is really fundamental for them to feel like they're understood, they have to feel like they can express that genuinely, not just in a way that makes people feel good about themselves or makes people, I don't know, feel anything. They just need to feel like that they can truthfully talk about what those things are without feeling like, oh, okay, I'm going to get pushback from this, I'm going to get stigma from this, or people are going to say I'm saying this just to make people feel sorry for me. Actually, sometimes going through illnesses like this, it's just unpleasant. Like, it is just unpleasant. There's no way to prettify it. So if we want people to be authentic, we have to give them the space to, if they're going through a struggle or a rare disease or an illness like that, for them to feel like they can truthfully talk about it. I've said already about how wonderful the online histio communities and groups are, and places like the Histiocytosis Association, even if you're a super shy person, like my family member, like myself. But I suppose another thing, if I'm trying not to repeat myself, is also every day is a new day. Sometimes it's just got to be as simple as that, right? Every day is a new day. Even if thinking about it in days is too hard, every hour is a new hour, every second's a new second. Or sometimes I like to think of my favourite quote from Frozen 2, which is, just do the next right thing. That sometimes when it is so hard and when things are so uncertain, just do the next right thing. Just focus on the next second, and then the next second, and then before you know it, a whole minute's passed. And that can be a way to just center, if you're a supporter, so you've got somebody going through histio, that can be a way of you finding strength within yourself to also give strength. And if you're going through it, that can be a way to just hopefully get through whatever bad period it is. I remember certain periods where, gosh, it was just really horrible to see, to look at. And you just have to think, okay, it's all right, we'll get through the next minute. And if you can get through the next minute, you can get through the next minute. And if you can get through the next minute, you can get through the next minute. And sometimes that's enough. That's enough. That's all you need to be okay. know not everybody in every country has access to something like the NHS. I'm very aware how expensive and painful medical care can be in many parts of the world. We're very lucky here in the UK to have the NHS, and I have never been more grateful. I think, you know, it's strange because when you grow up here, you just kind of, well, I don't know if take it for granted is the right word, but, you know, I would say by and large, if there's one thing the majority of people in this country can get behind, it's the NHS and that universal healthcare, and hopefully wanting to support the many amazing medical professionals that work in the NHS over that whole period. And to be honest, even now, because they still get support now, I'm very, 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 very immeasurably grateful for what the NHS do, the many medical professionals that give their time to it. I'm aware that the pay if you're an NHS doctor, I think, or a professional that works in the NHS system, might not necessarily be as lucrative as in other places, but they do it anyway, and it's often thankless. It was never that before I was like, oh well, the NHS is fine, but like I think that's really, I've never forgotten that. I've always been, every time that they've had that they've had help during this entire period, I've always been like, thank God we have, you know, all these amazing doctors, all these amazing nurses, all the amazing medical professionals that give their time to the NHS and support the people that are going through, you know, rare diseases like us do. You've done well. Like whatever you've dealt with today, or like right now, even in this moment, even if it's just that you've survived the past 5 minutes, whatever you were dealing with today, you've done well. Yeah. It's not about big things. It's not about because I've achieved this massive thing. It's just you've done well. Like whenever there's been a really difficult moment along this histio journey, not really, I wouldn't say it to myself, but because that would have been weird, but to them, sometimes, you know, it's a really difficult half an hour or a really difficult 5 steps into the garden or whatever. You've done well. We didn't tell ourselves that enough, so I'll tell that. You've done well.